Hi, I'm Marc, and on my channel I talk about UK politics and Brexit from an outside view, although I do know the UK from the inside as well. And this week my channel is dedicated to the Brexit future discussions. Even if many people simply don't want to hear this B word anymore, it still has an impact on the political landscape in the UK, but especially on the people and their lives in the country. And one of the ongoing discussions revolves around the nature of the future relationship between the British and the EU. The trade and cooperation agreement already exists, but other models are still being discussed in public today. And that's why I would like to talk about one of these models today again. And this time it is about Turkey. The trade relations between Turkey and the EU are mainly regulated by the so-called Association Agreement, which was signed on September 12th in 1963 and came into force in 1964. And this agreement, also known as the Ankara Agreement, laid the foundation for economic cooperation and the gradual integration of Turkey into the European market. An essential part of this agreement is the customs union, which came into force on January 1st in 1996. The customs union allows Turkey to export its goods to the EU without tariffs, while in return it also had to reduce tariffs on EU goods within its borders. And this customs union covers most industrial goods, but not agricultural products or services. In addition, there are various so-called expansion protocols and trade agreements that regulate and update specific aspects of trade relations. And these include agreements to harmonize standards and regulations, cooperation in certain economic sectors, and also the handling of trade policy and disputes. Recently, there have also been discussions about possible modernizations or expansions of the customs union, in particular to include new trade areas such as services and public procurement. Political and economic developments also have a recurring impact on these trade relations. But in summary, the trade relations between Turkey and the EU are primarily regulated by the Association Agreement and the Customs Union, just supplemented by other agreements and protocols. The trade relations between Turkey and the EU, regulated by the Association Agreement and the Customs Union, indeed do have several concrete effects. As I said, the customs union from 1996 allows free trade in industrial goods between Turkey and the EU without tariffs, but also without quantitative restrictions or quotas. And this means that Turkish companies can export their products to the EU duty-free, and this of course works vice versa. Both parties must lower their tariffs on most industrial goods compared to each other, and this applies to products such as machinery, cars, electronic devices, and especially famous in Turkey is textiles. Turkey must comply with the EU's trade rules, such as the regulations on technical standards and norms, and this means that products exported to the EU must of course comply with EU norms. And Turkey has committed to adapting its foreign trade agreements that it concludes with third countries to the EU's trade agreements. And this means that if the EU concludes a trade agreement with another country or region, this agreement will also apply to Turkey. But there are limitations of the customs union. The customs union does not apply to all agricultural products, and this means that tariffs and quantitative restrictions continue to apply to many agricultural products. And the customs union does not cover the areas of services and public procurement, as I said, and this means that Turkish companies' access to EU markets for services and public tenders remains very, very limited. Turkey has committed to largely align its product safety standards and regulations with EU norms, and this facilitates trade as products that meet EU standards can be sold on the Turkish market and vice versa. But Turkey must comply with EU competition rules to ensure that competition remains fair and there are no distortions of competitions here. But it's a little bit like with Switzerland, because there are ongoing talks on modernizing the customs union to include other sectors such as services, digital goods, and public procurement. But such enlargements would further deepen and broaden trade relations, but there are hurdles. And there's a lot of political and economic impact here, because political differences and tensions between Turkey and the EU, I just say Erdogan, can affect trade relations. Sanctions, trade restrictions, or political conflicts can deeply affect trade. Turkey is economically heavily dependent on the EU as a trading partner, as the EU absorbs a large share of Turkish exports and vice versa. But in summary, the customs union greatly facilitates and promotes trade relation between Turkey and the EU, but restrictions remain in certain areas. The close economic linkage and the need to comply with common standards and regulations significantly shape trade dynamics. The Turkey-EU customs union brings both advantages and disadvantages for both sides, and as usual in the videos in the last days, I will keep neither side secret. But today as well, I will start with the advantages. And for Turkey, it is that Turkey has free access to one of the largest and most prosperous markets in the world, and this has facilitated the export of Turkish manufactured goods to the EU and increased the competitiveness of Turkish products in the European market. And access to the EU market has led to an increase in foreign direct investment in Turkey. Many European companies have invested in Turkey to benefit from the favorable trade conditions and optimize production for the European market. And the customs union has contributed to Turkey's economic integration into the European economy, which has promoted the competitiveness and innovative power of Turkish companies. The need to adapt to EU norms and standards has also led to a modernization and improvement in the quality of Turkish products, which also strengthens their internal market. But there are also, of course, advantages for the EU. The EU has access to a large and growing market, and this offers European companies the opportunity to sell their products in Turkey and benefit from the economic opportunities in the region there. And the customs union has facilitated trade and led to lower prices for industrial goods, as tariffs and trade barriers have been reduced. And this benefits both consumers and companies. And the customs union has helped to establish stable trade relations between the EU and Turkey, which has reduced economic uncertainties and improved predictability for companies. By integrating Turkey into the European market, the EU can strengthen its economic influence in the region and contribute to stability and growth in the neighborhood. But as I said, there are also disadvantages, and we start with Turkey once more. Because Turkey must abide by EU trade rules, but has no influence on the design of EU trade and customs policy. And this means that it cannot conclude its own trade agreements with third countries without taking EU rules into account. And the customs union does not apply to services and public procurement, which limits the ability of Turkish companies to operate in the EU market in these areas. Free access to the EU market also means increased competition. Turkish companies often face tough competitive conditions as they have to compete with well-established European firms. But there are also disadvantages for the EU. The EU has a trade deficit with Turkey in some sectors such as textiles, and this means that the value of imports from Turkey exceeds exports to it, which can affect the competitiveness of European companies in some areas. And political tensions or economic problems in Turkey can have a negative impact on trade relations and create uncertainty for European companies. The different regulatory and political standards between Turkey and the EU can also lead to challenges and uncertainties in trade. Even though many standards have been harmonized, there are still differences that can cause problems. But overall, the customs union brings numerous benefits to both Turkey and the EU in terms of trade freedom and economic integration. At the same time, however, there are challenges and there are limitations that both sides need to consider. The balance between the benefits of increased market accessibility and the disadvantages of limited flexibility and competitive pressure is crucial for the future design of trade relations. But it would hypothetically be possible for the UK to establish trade relations similar to those Turkey has with the EU. However, this would require specific conditions and agreements, and we are only talking about some theories here. But there are key aspects under which this would be at least feasible. For a possible trade relationship for the UK, in this case with the customs union, the UK could seek a customs union with the EU, allowing access to that is similar to that of Turkey to the EU. But this would include free movement of goods without tariffs and without quotas on industrial goods. But the UK would have to adhere to EU standards and regulations on industrial goods similar to what Turkey does. And this means that products exported to the EU would also have to meet EU standards. We have the same now with the TCA. The UK would have to commit to aligning its foreign trade agreements with EU trade rules and could not enter into independent trade deals with third countries that circumvent EU rules. And we all know about this. An alternative option is, of course, the TCA, which we already have, which sets out more specific terms than the customs union, but still offers significant trade benefits. And to be honest, the British have something better with the TCA than the customs union, like the Turkish would bring, in case of what the will of the Brexiteers was, so to speak. And they were the majority that went to vote on that day of the Brexit vote. And so we still have to put that into consideration. Although a lot of people are talking about the current polls, what the people think nowadays. But I talked a lot on this channel about, do people really know what they're talking about? That was another reason for making the videos I did this week. Of course, a customs union would bring kind of almost full access for industrial products without tariffs or quotas. But the UK is absolutely interested in their services, and they are not included in this relationship between the EU and Turkey. And to gain access to the EU single market in that way, the UK would still need to comply with many EU rules and standards, even more than today, particularly in the area of product regulations and safety standards. And monitoring and dispute resolution mechanisms would need to be established to ensure that the rules are respected and conflicts are resolved efficiently. And in the end, the ECJ would have a say here. And the UK would once again need to design its foreign trade agreements so that they do not conflict with existing or future EU trade agreements. And this would mean that it could not enter into its own trade agreements that contradict EU rules. And where's the big freedom they always wanted? And the coordination of trade policy with the EU would be necessary to ensure that both sides can manage their trade relationship effectively and in accordance with the agreements. So a Turkish relationship is hypothetically possible. That's why I'm talking about all these this week. But the UK would have to make far more compromises than they're willing to, and even the Labour government does not. And the EU is not interested in having something like that. The time for discussing a customs union was during the withdrawal agreement negotiations. I said it in other videos before, entering a customs union with the EU or the single market is at this point in time completely out of the question. So the UK could in principle seek a trade relationship with the EU similar to that of Turkey, whether through a customs union, a free trade agreement, or comprehensive partnership agreement, which we have with the TCA. But there would be a lot of conditions here, and to get as close as Turkey is with the tariff-free and quota-free trade in industrial products, that's not even in the interest of the British. So, while being hypothetically possible, I completely rule that out once again. So if you want to know more, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.